The Kalahari sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the twisted, overturned chassis of the SUV. Inside, suspended by a seatbelt that dug cruelly into her hip, 72-year-old Clara felt the world spin in a dizzying haze of pain and heat. Blood throbbed in her temples, a frantic drumbeat counting down her final moments. Every ragged breath she drew in tasted of dust and leaking fuel. The silence of the vast desert was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all hope. She tried to move, to free her leg pinned beneath the crumpled dashboard, but a blinding, white-hot agony shot through her, stealing her strength and leaving her gasping. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone, a prisoner in a metal cage under an indifferent sky, her life slowly draining away into the scorched sand. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the blinding glare of the shattered windshield, offering a moment of false relief. The silhouette that cast it was immense, a shape of primal power framed by a magnificent, dark mane. A lion. Clara's heart seized in her chest, a frozen knot of pure terror. As if summoned from a nightmare, a second lion appeared, just as large, padding with an unnerving, silent grace. They approached the wreck not with the frantic energy of a hunter, but with a slow, deliberate curiosity that was somehow more frightening. Their amber eyes, ancient and intelligent, were fixed on her, peering through the broken glass into the tomb of her vehicle. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the larger lion's chest, a sound that vibrated through the metal frame and deep into Clara's bones. The sound was not one of aggression, but it might as well have been. For Clara, it was the pronouncement of a death sentence. Her mind, already clouded by pain and dehydration, screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something, anything. But her body was a useless weight, trapped and broken. She squeezed her eyes shut, a futile attempt to block out the sight of her impending doom. She could smell their scent on the hot air, a wild, musky odor that spoke of dust and raw power. The soft thud of their massive paws on the sand was a countdown, each step bringing them closer to her vulnerable form. This was the end, she thought. A life of capturing nature's beauty, concluding by becoming its prey. The larger lion, Zaire, lowered his massive head to the opening where the windshield used to be, his face mere inches from hers. She could feel the heat of his breath, see the individual whiskers twitching as he sniffed the air. She braced for the crushing power of his jaws, for the tearing of claws that would end her suffering in a final, brutal instant. But the attack never came. Instead, his gaze held a strange, unsettling calmness, a deep focus that seemed to look right through her fear and into her very soul. He saw not a meal, but a fellow creature in distress, and in that moment, the entire situation became impossibly complex. But to understand how this moment of suspended terror came to be, we must go back to the beginning. Nos, Block 2, context. It had all started 3 weeks prior. Clara wasn't a tourist seeking cheap thrills. She was a chronicler of lives, and the lives that captivated her belonged to this specific pride. For days, she had tracked the two magnificent brothers, whom she had privately named Zaire and Kale. Her routine was one of immense patience, parking her Land Rover at a respectful distance before the sun even considered rising, its engine a low hum that the desert quickly swallowed. She learned their habits, the way Zaire, the elder, would survey his territory from the highest rock, his gaze profound and calculating, while Kale remained his restless, powerful shadow. She spoke to them through the quiet clicks of her camera shutter, a language of observation and reverence. She never crowded them, never pursued them aggressively, offering a silent contract of mutual respect in their shared, wild space. From the lion's perspective, the strange metal creature had become a familiar part of their world. It appeared with the cool morning air and vanished with the encroaching heat of midday, never violating the invisible boundaries of their domain. Zaire, whose mind processed the world in scents and sounds, had catalogued her presence. The faint smell of canvas and tea, the low thrum of the engine, these were not the sharp, alarming signals of a threat. He sensed the stillness from within the machine, a stark contrast to the noisy, frantic energy of the safari vehicles that sometimes blundered through. This creature was different. It watched, it waited. Its presence was a quiet hum in the background of their existence, a constant but unobtrusive observer that had, through its sheer consistency and lack of aggression, earned a place of neutral acceptance in his territorial map. The true test of their unspoken truce came a week before the accident. A sharp rock had shredded one of Clara's tires, leaving her stranded not 50 yards from where the brothers were resting in the sparse shade of an acacia tree. Panic was a useless instinct here. Instead, she moved with slow, deliberate grace, her voice a low, continuous murmur as she retrieved the jack and tools. Cale rose, a low rumble in his chest, but Zaire remained lying down, his massive head raised, watching her. He saw no jerky movements of fear, heard no sharp cries of alarm. He saw only a creature methodically solving a problem, its vulnerability laid bare, but its spirit unbroken. He watched her work for nearly an hour, his intense amber eyes tracking her every move until she was finished. It was a profound exchange, a display of human composure met with leonine curiosity, not aggression. That single event shifted the dynamic from tolerance to a fragile, burgeoning trust. Days later, she found them at a secluded waterhole as dusk painted the sky in shades of fire and violet. Her work for the day was done, but she didn't leave. She simply cut the engine, her camera resting on the seat beside her, and watched them. She was no longer just a photographer. She was a fellow inhabitant of this vast, silent land. After drinking his fill, Zaire turned his head, and his gaze locked with hers across the dwindling light. There was no challenge, no threat, only a deep, mutual recognition that transcended species. It was a silent acknowledgement of their shared existence. This quiet, profound communion became the bedrock of their unique relationship. But what happened next would shatter their peaceful world and test that bond in a crucible of fire and twisted metal. Mun Block 3, the escalation of the crisis. The sun had climbed, transforming the Land Rover from a prison into a furnace. The brief respite Zaire's shadow had offered was gone, replaced by a relentless, baking heat that warped the air into shimmering waves. Clara's consciousness was a flickering candle flame, threatening to extinguish with every ragged breath. The throbbing in her temples now had a partner, a desperate, clawing thirst that made her tongue feel like a swollen piece of wood in her mouth. She tried to shift her weight, to alleviate the crushing pressure on her leg, but the movement sent a fresh explosion of white-hot agony through her body, leaving her gasping and dizzy. The world outside the broken window began to blur, the sharp outlines of the acacia trees softening into a hazy, indifferent backdrop to her suffering. From his vantage point, Zaire felt the oppressive heat radiating from the metal shell. He could smell the situation worsening. The scent of blood, once sharp, was now stale, but a new, more alarming odor was rising. The smell of a life slowly shutting down. His primal instincts, honed over generations of survival, were in turmoil. This was not the scent of prey. There was no panic, no frantic energy that would trigger the chase. This was the scent of slow decay, of a life being drained by the merciless sun and the unyielding metal. He watched her movements become smaller, more feeble, a faint flutter of a hand against the seatbelt. A deep, unfamiliar disquiet settled in his chest, a feeling that this profound wrongness in his territory could not be ignored. The Kalahari itself had become the primary antagonist, a silent, impassive executioner. The vast, open sky offered no clouds for relief, only an endless, brilliant blue that was a mockery of hope. The sand absorbed the solar radiation and threw it back, creating an oven effect that cooked her from all sides. Clara's mind, starved of water and oxygen, began to play tricks on her. She saw shimmering pools of water on the horizon that she knew were mirages, yet her dehydrated brain desperately clung to the illusion. Every minute that ticked by was another victory for the desert, another measure of life stolen from her. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a crushing weight, emphasizing her absolute and total isolation in a world that was actively trying to erase her. Hope arrived and vanished in the span of 30 seconds. A tiny speck in the sky grew into the shape of a small Cessna, likely carrying tourists on a scenic flight over the dunes. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, cut through Clara's delirium. She tried to wave, to use the crystal of her watch to flash a signal, but her arm felt like it was made of lead. Her movements were pathetic, barely a twitch, completely invisible from that altitude. The drone of the engine was a sweet song of salvation that faded into a heartbreaking whisper. Then nothing. The plane continued its journey, its occupants oblivious to the life and death drama playing out below. The brief, cruel hope it had offered was gone, leaving behind a despair more profound than anything she had felt before. This shift in the atmosphere was not lost on the lions. Kale, ever the more restless of the two, began to pace, his powerful muscles rippling with agitation. He let out a low, frustrated growl, a sound of pure incomprehension. The stillness of the scene grated on his nerves. His world was one of action, of hunt and rest, and this strange tableau fit nowhere in his understanding. Zaire, however, remained preternaturally calm, his focus absolute. He watched the metal box, watched the flicker of life inside it dimming. He took a step closer, lowered his massive head, and let out a soft, questioning chuff. It was not a threat. It was a communication, an attempt to elicit a response from the creature whose suffering was a palpable disturbance in the air. Clara's world dissolved into a series of fragmented images. The face of her late husband, the sound of her daughter's laughter, the feeling of her first camera in her hands, all flashed behind her eyes in a chaotic, final slideshow. The searing pain in her leg became a distant, dull ache, and the oppressive heat felt almost like a warm embrace, lulling her into a dangerous surrender. The only anchor to reality was the unwavering, intense gaze of the lion just beyond the glass. She felt her fight for life ebbing away, the will to resist draining into the scorched sand beneath her. The thread holding her to this world was stretched to its breaking point. Time was running out. Something had to be done, or all would be lost. Krop's Block 4, the turning point. Zaire's mind, a complex tapestry of instinct and ancient memory, reeled. The scent of Clara's fading life was a discordant note in the symphony of his territory. It wasn't the smell of a rightful kill, ripe with the adrenaline of the chase, but the stagnant odor of a spirit being extinguished by metal and sun. He looked into her eyes, clouded with pain, and saw not prey, but the same quiet observer who had watched his pride for weeks with such reverence. He remembered her by the acacia tree, vulnerable, yet calm as she fixed her machine, her presence a steady, non-threatening hum. A profound conflict churned within him, the primal urge to ignore the weak, versus a powerful, emergent feeling that this slow death was a violation of the natural order he presided over. The Watcher did not deserve to be erased by the silent cruelty of the desert. With a sudden, decisive movement, he pulled his massive head back from the wreckage. The action was sharp, deliberate, and it broke the spell of impending doom. He turned it to Kale, whose agitation was a low, continuous rumble in his chest. Zaire met his brother's confused gaze and let out a soft, guttural sound deep in his throat. It was not a command Kale understood with logic, but one he felt through the unbreakable hierarchy of their bond. It meant, cease. Be still. Kale's pacing stopped, his unease now bridled by his brother's unshakable authority. Zaire then turned his back on the wreck, a move that made Clara's fading heart plummet. But he wasn't abandoning her. His gaze swept across the vast, shimmering emptiness of the Kalahari, searching, calculating. He was no longer a passive witness. He had become a strategist. He planted his massive front paws deep into the scorching sand, bracing himself as if against a powerful wind. He inhaled, his ribcage expanding to a breathtaking size, his muscles coiling with immense potential energy. From her metal tomb, Clara saw the movement through a darkening haze. This was it, the final, terrifying display of power before the end. Her mind, now detached and floating, registered the sheer, awesome beauty of the creature that was about to kill her. But Zaire's purpose was aimed not at her, but at the indifferent sky. He was gathering every ounce of his strength, preparing to shatter the sacred code of the predator, to sacrifice stealth and silence for a desperate, audacious broadcast. He was about to risk everything, exposing his location to any rival who might be listening. Then, he opened his jaws. A sound erupted that was not the sharp, guttural roar of a hunt or a challenge, but something far more profound. It was a deep, resonant bellow that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, a sustained and powerful wave of pure sound that rolled across the dunes. It was a summons, a sonic beacon of distress, devoid of aggression, yet filled with an undeniable urgency that spoke a language older than words. It was a call sent into the vast, silent emptiness, a declaration that something was fundamentally wrong in this corner of his kingdom, and that it required immediate attention. Again and again the call went out, each wave of sound a fragile thread of hope cast into the immense void. What happened next would depend entirely on who or what was listening. The sound wave of Zaire's roar, a desperate plea cast into the void, did not return unanswered. Miles away, a veteran safari guide named Ben, tracking a herd of gemsbok, heard the unnatural echo. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Lions roared to claim territory or to find their pride, but this was different. A sustained, urgent bellow that spoke not of power, but of profound distress. Against all protocol, he turned his jeep towards the sound. As he crested a dune, the scene that unfolded below froze the blood in his veins. The mangled wreck of a vehicle, and, standing sentinel beside it, the two magnificent brothers. He cut the engine, the sudden silence deafening. The lions watched him, their amber eyes holding not a challenge, but an invitation. Time itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move in this impossible drama. Ben exited his vehicle with a slowness that was almost painful, every movement telegraphing his peaceful intentions. He kept his eyes low, a sign of respect, but was intensely aware of the two apex predators observing his every step. Kale's tail twitched, a sign of his coiled tension, but Zaire remained as still as a golden statue, his gaze a palpable force. Ben felt as if he were being granted passage into a sacred space. As he drew closer, the acrid smell of gasoline and the faint metallic scent of blood hit him. He finally reached the overturned SUV and peered inside, his heart clenching at the sight of Clara, pale and still, pinned within the metal cage. Zaire watched him, a silent, powerful observer who had summoned help and was now entrusting him to finish the job. The interior of the SUV was an oven, the air thick with the smell of Clara's suffering. Ben's hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he reached in, his voice a low, continuous murmur. "It's okay, I'm here to help. You're safe now." He touched her shoulder, and her skin was alarmingly cool, despite the suffocating heat. His gaze fell upon her leg, trapped beneath the crumpled dashboard, in a brutal grip of twisted steel. He knew that a single wrong move could sever an artery or cause irreparable damage. He retrieved a small crowbar from his belt, not as a weapon, but as a tool of delicate liberation. The lions remained motionless, their presence a bizarre comfort, two guardians, ensuring this sacred act of rescue was not disturbed by the harsh laws of the wild. Time seemed to warp and stretch as Ben began his work. He wedged the tip of the crowbar into a small gap, his muscles straining not with brute force, but with controlled, precise pressure. The metal groaned in protest, a sound that grated on the profound silence of the desert. He watched Clara's face, her eyelids fluttering with a flicker of returning consciousness. He shifted his weight, applying leverage in tiny, incremental movements, sweat stinging his eyes as it dripped from his brow. He could feel the lions, unwavering stare on his back, a silent jury judging his every action. This was more than a rescue. It was a test, a delicate negotiation between man, machine, and the majestic rulers of this unforgiving land. He had to succeed. With a final, agonizingly slow pull, the dashboard shifted just enough. A space of mere inches opened up, but it was the space between life and death. Ben carefully slid his arms around Clara, supporting her frail body as he gently maneuvered her leg from the metal's embrace. The moment she was free, a collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the air, an unspoken exhalation from man and beast alike. He could feel the faint, thready pulse in her neck as he cradled her against his chest. She was impossibly light. Zaire, who had been a statue of coiled intensity, finally relaxed his posture, his massive head lowering in a gesture of finality. The tension that had held the scene in a vice-like grip finally, mercifully, broke. Ben carried Clara away from the wreck, laying her gently on a blanket in the shade of his Jeep. The first conscious breath she took was a deep, shuddering gasp, the sound of a soul returning to its body. Her eyes, hazy with pain and dehydration, fluttered open and focused not on him, but past him. She looked toward the two lions, who were now turning to leave, their duty fulfilled. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Zaire paused, turning his magnificent head one last time to meet her gaze across the shimmering air. It was a look of profound, silent understanding. Then, he and his brother melted into the landscape, vanishing as if they were never there. But the bond forged in that crucible of sun and steel was about to face its greatest test yet. 3 weeks later, the African sun felt different to Clara. It was no longer a merciless hammer, but a warm, life-giving embrace. From the shaded veranda of the reserve's main lodge, her bandaged leg propped on a stool, she watched the savannah breathe. The frantic energy of the photographer was gone, replaced by a profound, contemplative stillness. She wasn't looking through a lens anymore. She was simply seeing, feeling the deep ancient pulse of the land that had almost claimed her, and the creatures who had saved her. Her camera sat untouched in its bag, its purpose now seeming trivial compared to the truth she had lived. One evening, as the sky bled into hues of orange and purple, they appeared. Zaire and Kale emerged from the tall grass at the edge of the clearing, their golden coats glowing in the last light. They were not looking for prey. They simply stood there, surveying their kingdom. Clara's heart didn't pound with fear, but with a quiet, overwhelming sense of gratitude. She slowly raised her hand, a simple, open-palmed gesture of acknowledgement. Across the distance, Zaire turned his magnificent head, and for a fleeting moment, his amber eyes met hers. It was a silent conversation, a final, mutual recognition of the bond forged in desperation. That single, shared glance confirmed everything. The incident in the ravine was not a fluke of nature or a strange coincidence. It was a deliberate act of empathy, a choice made by a being who saw past the boundaries of species and recognized a fellow soul in distress. Zaire's roar had not just been a call for help. It had been a declaration that compassion is a force more powerful than instinct, a universal language that connects all life. His courage rewrote the rules, proving that the capacity for profound kindness is not an exclusively human trait. Clara watched as the two brothers turned and dissolved back into the twilight, their duty complete. Her survival was a testament to the idea that in the heart of the wild, you can find the soul of humanity. The greatest lessons often come from the most unexpected teachers, reminding us that we are all part of the same intricate, beautiful story. Do you also believe that animals can teach us about love? Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more moments that restore our faith in connection.